You are a sign of God's love for humanity. That's what the church teaches us. The church says that man and woman, the love between a man and woman, that our mission as a family is to be a sign of God's love for humanity. And if we do that, if we married couples go out and show the world, this is how you love. This is how you love, and lay down our lives for each other and lay down our lives for children, love our children. So when people think, what is God like? I don't know what God is like. That they can look at us, they can look at families. And I really believe that if we can be a force of transformation for the world simply by being who God has called us to be.
Welcome to Into the Truth, the podcast from the Catholic Truth Society. My name is Piero Finaldi, the CEO of the CTS and your host for this podcast. So today we have the great honour and pleasure of welcoming Mike and Alicia Hernon to the podcast. Welcome. So Mike and Alicia, you have been running this great apostolate called the Messy Family Project for the last 10 years. Is that
it's
right?
It's not a very grand name or anything.
Yeah. So you come from the amazing place of Steubenville, Ohio, which is like a sort of Catholic...
It's in the water.
What's going on? What is going on in that place? You'll have to tell us. Now, you've been married for over 30 years. You have 10 children, number of grandchildren as well. Eight. Fantastic. And the Messy Family Project. I mean, you can tell us a little bit more about it. What exactly does it entail, and where did the idea come from?
Yeah, well, we've been in marriage ministry before, helping couples prepare for marriage, but really more in the last 10, 15 years, we had lots of young couples coming to us seeking advice, both in marriage and family issues. And so we have 10 children, but Alicia is also from a family of 10, and which is part of our world domination scheme here. And but as they kept coming, they asked more questions. Oh, and they kept saying, you need to do a podcast. And we said, what's a podcast? And so we've been doing that podcast for a little over 10 years now, simply as our little offering, if you will, of sharing some of the insights we've learned through the School of Hard Knocks. We're not theorists, we're practitioners in family life. And but we see a real need today in the church for couples, for parents to have real support and encouragement. And that's what we try to do through our podcast as well as our nonprofit work.
Yeah, so we started the podcast first, just at those conversations, just kind of like as an older brother or sister. Like I'm sure you do, you and Chiara do for other young couples. But then it kind of grew as couples came to us, and then we have like thousands and thousands of people. We realized that some people wanted courses to kind of go through in a systematic way, talking about marriage, technology, even like mothers walking their daughters through the changes that come in adolescence. So we've created courses now, and then of course we go around and we speak now in the UK, just finishing that up, but then also of course all over the US and other places as well.
Yeah, so I was interested maybe to ask you, so you've spoken in many parishes and all around in the States, and you've just finished this tour of the UK. Yeah. Is there anything that you see that's really kind of different in couples over here than in the States?
Yes, drastic differences. It's dramatic.
I was going to say mainly it's the construction signs that are very different in the U.S.
Yeah. After we got used to driving on the left side of the road,
exactly.
There is, we needed a translator for some of our American idioms or expressions. But what we really found is that couples are the same everywhere, struggling in the midst of a very busy world, in a world coming after our kids in many ways, the secular culture that's trying to target our kids and separate mom and dad. I found more in common than I found different. There were expressions, there were things that we needed to refine and maybe share a different example or
you did a marriage MOT. Did you know what an MOT was?
No idea. I had no idea what we signed ourselves up for. And in Ohio, we don't have to put our cars through an annual inspection either. So but now I love the idea. It's beautiful.
Marriage Ministry of Transport, I think it was. That's what it actually is. Yes. No, fantastic. So tell me something. Why did you choose this? The moniker of Messy and the Messy family, because that's not what most people would ideally be going for. But
You know what? It's funny because when we moved from doing just the podcast to doing the full-time ministry that we're in now, we actually did take some time to look at what are we going to call ourselves? What is it going to be? And we went through each word, and we've just found that the messy was just key. It was just a key word. And I think it's key because everyone can relate to it. Every person, like they see that and it makes them laugh. It's a little bit lighthearted, but also expresses the reality that sometimes we get married and we have high ideals, right? And we think, well, I'm going to be so much better than my parents were, right? I'm not going to make the same mistakes that they made. But then when you get into it, you realize it's not this nice, neat little package. And what I always say to people is that if someone comes along and they say, oh, this is the only way to be a parent, they're selling something. Because there's just not true. There's many different ways to do this. But the one thing in common is that it's messy. It's messy in the sense that it's not a nice, neat packaged thing, but there's also sometimes a joy in the mess. You know, like I think about, use the example of like baking with kids, right? Baking with kids, it's like my personal purgatory, baking with kids. I cannot stand doing that because it's always messy and like not efficient and all of that. But why?
You do it much better on your own.
100%.
Everything is easier.
It's easier. But why do I do it? It's because of the traditions. It's because of the skills that are being passed on. And it's because of that time together, that building of relationships. So it's messy, but there's a joy in it, and it's still worth doing. Yeah. So that's why we've been pretty intentional about keeping that word.
And the idea, too, is that we don't want to create a barrier to entry. A lot of people don't feel like they have what it takes, or they're not competent enough to be a parent, or they feel like they're failing. Yeah. And we want to make sure it's like, hey, everyone's welcome here. We don't want to stay in this place where it's just mess, but there's a beauty in this. And there's a priest told us one time that it's God doesn't love us in spite of our mess. He loves us because of our mess. You know, like we bring our lives, our family life, you know, whatever's going on, we bring it to the Lord. We bring it to God. And He makes it new. He transforms it. Right. But He is the one who created us as humans.
So when it comes to marriage, messiness rather than cleanliness is next to godliness.
There you go. That's right. Well, sometimes people put their Pinterest perfect ideal as a model, and let's be authentic. Let's be who we are, and let's move from that place.
Yeah, and especially in this day and age, that's something that we are always fighting against, especially with Catholic families, because I feel like a lot of Catholic families feel like, oh, for us to be a Catholic family, my kids need to all look like this. We can never have a child screaming, crying, and that we're dragging out of Mass. Oh no, that's not the way a Catholic family is supposed to look. And that's not true. I feel like Satan does that, puts up these false images. Oh, this is what it has to look like. And then people feel like they're failing. And I feel like that's what Satan wants. The evil one wants to discourage us. And that's not what God wants. Yeah. God wants us to bring ourselves exactly as we are, and He wants to love us exactly where we are.
Yeah, He really makes the perfect the enemy of the very good.
Exactly, really. Exactly.
And in fact, it's not that perfection would be awful if we could ever reach
totally.
It. It would be awful. It would be terrible.
Exactly.
I mean, just sort of, I always try and get a bit your kind of backstory, but I think in this case, I'd be really interested to know, like, how was your own kind of preparation for marriage and a family life?
Well, all right, so I'll start with me first here. So my parents got divorced before I went into high school or secondary school. And so I grew up, and actually how my dad is a recovering alcoholic. He has been sober for 30 plus years. Thank God for that. But I had a troubled childhood in many ways. But in the midst of that, I looked and said, I want something more. And I didn't have what I thought was the ideal, and so I was hunting for it. Even as a teenager, I was looking for what is the perfect family. And I did a lot of visiting friends and looking around, and I did that really even in college and so forth. And I found there wasn't a perfect family out there, but I did find that there were people who could make it work. And for me, that was the seed that was planted. Like I knew I wasn't going to take marriage for granted, and I knew there are wounds, there are issues when you come from a divorced family that you need to work through, right? So that you don't bring that into your marriage. But it also set me up with a hunger and a desire to say, I don't want to take this for granted. I don't want to take being a husband or being a dad for granted, and I want to seek out mentors. And so that planted a seed early in my heart that I wanted something more. And Alicia came from a very different background, though, really.
But I feel like, sometimes, like, I was coming from a place of, my parents raised 10 children. They're very much in love with each other. There's no really divorce in my family at all. And I feel like sometimes when people come from that background, you can think, oh, well, you just get married and it all works out, And whereas Mike was coming from the standpoint of, sometimes you get married and it doesn't work out. And so that was actually a great blessing, even though, like, I would never think, like, for my children, you kind of think, oh, what would you want their spouse to be like? And you want them to be like just coming from this great background and all of that. But it's been a great blessing, because Mike, like he just said, took nothing for granted and was like, no, we need to work on this. We need to be very intentional. We need to be very thoughtful. So when we were dating, even, I had never met somebody who was already kind of like forward thinking, like, well, what do you want your marriage to be like? What do you want he would ask questions like that. And he would tell me about, of course, his background and the couples that he admired. So just having, I feel like, those important conversations about, like, envisioning what's ahead of us, those were conversations we talked a lot about. And then, of course, when we got engaged.
So what is our kind of joint project that we're
exactly.
kind of
involved in?
Rather than
vision.
Yeah, rather than simply thinking, okay, we these unspoken things, which then can end up being quite different. We think we're on the same page, but maybe we're not.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the best marriage. But the best marriage prep is really having a united vision. It doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It doesn't need 100% authentic, or understanding everything. But if you share that together, you're like, the big things are together, that sets your marriage up for a whole new trajectory.
Right. And even if you don't have that, I mean, that's one thing that we do talk about in some of our courses about creating a united vision for your family and just how very important that is. But that was something that we kind of had from the very beginning. And Mike was really fascinated with my family because I remember when he came to visit, we were both 19 the first time he came to meet my family. And I felt like he kind of walked into this big Catholic family and was like, this is heaven.
I was attracted to her and her family.
Well, they always say, you're marrying the family as well.
Yes.
He very much
for the good and
in
the
this
bad.
case, for the good.
And some little.
So, in a sense, that was kind of your sort of remote, what the church talks about, remote preparation for marriage and then proximate. What about your kind of proximate, your marriage courses? Because I have my own opinions about marriage courses, which we may get into, probably not.
Well, the one thing that we did that we highly recommend is that we did Catholic Engaged Encounter. And when we did our Engaged Encounter, and then we actually served on an Engaged Encounter team for 7 years after we got married. And I feel like that was in many ways a preparation for what we're doing now in our ministry. But the reason that I recommend Catholic Engaged Encounter is because it wasn't about the presentations. It wasn't even about like what we learned. It was about learning to communicate. And that the focus was very much, at least on our weekend, was very much about the conversations that and they would bring up topics, but I feel like bringing those things into light, even if they're not all resolved, like even if you discover you see money differently or you have different visions for how many kids you should have or whatever, at least and they gave you the tools.
That's not a course that's sort of available in the UK. About half our listeners are UK. So is it a long course or is it just a week?
Actually, it is. I think it is in the UK because we met a couple in, they were in Lincoln, who is a part of Catholic Marriage Encounter, and they had done a Catholic Engaged Encounter. So, but I think any course that kind of forces you to, or any day even, that gives you time to talk and gives you those communication tools, I think that would serve you. But that's what we did.
Yeah, and we also did a Catholic theology class, being at Franciscan University as students. And so, we had other supplemental resources that we did that weren't required, but we wanted to know, what are we getting ourselves into? Which we didn't fully know what we were doing.
We also did a natural family planning course, which again, absolutely essential. Okay. Absolutely.
We'll come
essential.
back to that. Sure. So In the kind of courses that you offer, and you always kind of begin with the marriage.
Yes.
Now, the stats with regard, especially to Catholic marriage, are pretty bad when it comes, in both in the UK and in the States, in terms of just sheer numbers. And
Yes.
I mean, sometimes you look at, even city parishes. You'll look and at the stats that come out every year, and there's maybe 2 marriages. There's maybe not the wedding churches, the pretty ones. They have a bit more, but sometimes the numbers are really unbelievable. And so I mean, what can we do about that? What do you think is the real kind of underlying issue there? Because I think we're coming to a point where we're almost hitting kind of rock bottom, I think, just in the general Catholic population. Yeah. So what's your kind of diagnosis and your...
There could be a complicated answer, but the simple answer is, if you want to not be a statistic, then don't act like a statistic. Meaning the Catholic population in both the UK and US and most of the developed world is pretty mirroring what is society as a whole, which means we're following society. And as we've seen, I'll just tie this to the faith for just a second, we have seen social science, the research, the data points to the fact that before there was a decline in the faith, before there was loss of faith, there was actually the breakdown of the family, the divorce and so forth that happened. And so there's a lot that are coming against us as Catholics, but just in marriage in general. In order to not become a statistic, you have to do things that are extraordinary, if you will, in this world, which are actually very ordinary in the past, spending time together, prioritizing your marriage, and developing a real fundamental orientation towards your spouse and making that the foundation. And what we have seen is the marriages that survive, they're not doing things that are very complicated. They're not doing things that require degrees or psychological counseling, or they're really simple things. Relationships are built with the material of time. Mm-hmm. And when we put time in to flourishing our marriage, allowing that to grow, it actually flourishes. It actually works. But we are so busy and frantic, we often just drift apart. They don't recognize it, and they're walking away. And so we do believe there's a resurgence. And even in our tours, I would say in the UK, we have been given so much hope. Couples that are taking time out to invest in their marriage, invest in being better parents and all of that. That is what's really making a difference. And we have a good friend who started an organization called Communio in the US that gets churches together because they have seen how it destroys churches when marriages aren't strong. And so they've gotten churches to do date nights for couples, to do occasions where couples will say, I'm going to work on my marriage through these conversations and through some practical growing of skills. Mm-hmm. Not everybody is born with the ability to communicate effectively, to have the skills needed to have a strong marriage. But everybody is born with the ability to grow and learn those skills. And that's, it takes some work, but we've seen it transform in people's lives, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's the problem, I kind of like what I heard you say, that there's two problems. I mean, one problem is that there's a growing number of divorces, but then also people just aren't getting married. Yeah. Oh, yeah, Mm-hmm. And I think that those marriages right now, people who are listening to this podcast, watching these videos, need to recognize that your marriage is not just about you, and it's not just about your children, though it's very important for you and for your children, 100%. But your marriage is for the world. You are a sign of God's love for humanity. That's what the church teaches us. The church says that man and woman, the love between a man and woman, that our mission as a family is to be a sign of God's love for humanity. And if we do that, if we married couples go out and show the world, this is how you love. This is how you love, and lay down our lives for each other and lay down our lives for children, love our children. So when people think, what is God like? I don't know what God is like. That they can look at us, they can look at families. And I really believe that if we can be a force of transformation for the world simply by being who God has called us to be. Like that, that each family, John Paul again tells us, each family has a call to be to become what you are. Become what you are. Become a better father, mother, sister, brother. Like, we don't have to go out necessarily to the mission fields, right? We need to love our families and really do that in a transformative way. And if we believe what the Holy Father said, that we can be that beacon.
Yeah, I mean, in Acts it sort of says that those who really saw the Christians said, see how they love one another.
Exactly.
And that was what attracted them. And how much easier is it to see that in a family that truly loves each other? I mean, because I'm very interested in just sort of thinking about this a bit more. I mean, in a sense, I feel like the world has been kind of telling this lie that it's all about the individual. Everything's based on the individual. For the last, let's say, from the French Revolution, let's say, but from the Enlightenment, and it's almost like the society was sort of a bit impervious to that because of the families, because of the strong families, and I feel like in the past sort of 50 years, that message has finally got through that it's all about the individual. Whereas, the church has always said the fundamental building block of society is the family.
Yes. Right. It's not the individual, it's the family. Yeah.
And really that's what it comes down to, right? Because even in our parenting, the way we treat our children, right? Do we rotate around the kids? Do we orbit around them? Are we a child-centered family? Or really, is marriage really that foundation that gives the children security, the foundational relationship? It shows that they're part of a community. And when the world, like Alicia was talking about, like, we give that tangible witness because the way they used to train bank tellers was to give them lots of real bills so that when a counterfeit slipped in, they may not know why, but they're like, this doesn't feel right, right? And it's this simple idea that in our home, we're teaching our children not only what marriage looks like, but what human love looks like, what it means to belong someplace, what it means to have a true identity. Yeah. And if we want to set ourselves and our children up for a real, for the world that they're entering, is we give them that experience in our family culture. And when you look out at the world and you say, I can't change the world, you can change your family. Mother Teresa said, you want to change the world, go home and love your family. What she meant is lay your life down, show them what love looks like, and you are changing the world. The media and maybe secular forces may want to tell us a different story, but the reality is I've read the end of the book, we win, they lose, okay? and families will, it's printed on our human hearts that we are made for communion. The lockdowns, I think, taught us that we need each other, right? And it's opening up the mind of those enlightened, individualistic people saying, I need others. And again, you look at those statistics of rising depression and all these things that we're seeing the fruit of isolation. I think now more than ever, people are longing for what the family has. Yeah. They're longing for a sense of identity, belonging, and purpose. And that's what a family starts with. That's what the family does for each individual so that the individual can flourish. And it's God didn't mean for kids to be just dropped into the middle of nowhere. They were meant to be in the protection of a marriage, and they were meant to be nourished in a family. And when you get first things right, the rest of society actually gets stronger. And we're seeing the fruit of, whether it be Paul VI in Humanae Vitae, what he called for, right, this is the full flourishing of the human person only as possible within the family. And if you lose that, then everything else is lost.
I mean, when my wife and I were giving some marriage courses, one of the things that we used to do, we used to talk about the four loves. Yeah. And one of the things that we would ask the couples to do is to kind of rank them in order of importance. And one of the interesting things that we found was that they would always put Eros at the bottom. The kind of romantic love ended up being, and I think one of the problems were these were people who were coming to a big wedding church, so they were often people who didn't have maybe weren't hugely practicing, and so in one sense it felt like they had got to the end of the sort of romantic part of their relationship, and now they decided they were going to get serious and have some children and stuff. Right. Whereas I heard, listening to one of the talks that you gave over this time in the UK, you were talking about how it's in the family, it's the marriage that is kind of key. Can you say something about that?
Yeah, the four loves is great. I'll let you answer this, but C.S. Lewis, I mean, there's just so many things to go into those four loves. And it is only as Christians can we really experience all four in a real way within the family.
And I think that for sometimes we can think, oh, well, the only love that's really important is that, agape, right? That self-sacrificing love. And it is certainly very important. Really, all four of the loves are present in marriage, like they're all combined together. But the thing is that in the marriage relationship, it's kind of like you can't just be like holding on, and just do. I feel like eros is kind of like that wind in the sails. It kind of like greases the wheels, if you will, in the relationship. Kind of helps you when you have a love relationship, and especially through the marital embrace and even the physical reactions that happen in man and woman during that time and all the bonding that happens, kind of like helps you forget that like he didn't take out the trash that night. Oh, who cares? I love him so much. Like those kinds of things are actually very, very important. And I think it's so important for our children to see that mom and dad aren't just teammates, right? They're not just mommy and daddy, but for children to understand, no, mom and dad are lovers. They are lovers. Why is that so important? It's so important because then that's what they will want. They will want not a loveless marriage, but a passionate marriage, right? That kind of, again, helps keeps that wind in the sails, helps you keep moving forward, but also to continually pursue each other in relationship because you want to be able to view the intimacy in that other person. Like you may have emotional intimacy with a few people in your life, but it's only with your spouse that you have emotional and physical intimacy. And so if you think about your spouse in that light, that is a very specific category. This one person in your life. How do we love them? How can we kind of keep gas in the car, if you will, to kind of keep moving towards that physical and emotional intimacy? And I feel like that's the eros part, is like because it kind of drives you. If you think it's passions, and passions are good, these are God-given, like to keep us pursuing each other, because you never stop growing in relationship. You never ever stop. Like you're still, I think about my parents who are at our house with our kids right now, who are in their 70s, 80s, and just how it is so obvious to me how much they are still in love with each other and pursuing relationship with each other.
Yeah. And just very briefly, the idea of the loves are about tethering ourselves to people, right? When you have a filial love with your spouse, there's a friendship. There's something beautiful about that. But then if you don't have the eros, you are white knuckling it. There is something that isn't fully human when you miss out on that. But then the storge is that unconditional laying down. I mean, obviously we receive that primarily from God, right? But that's a parent-child, a gift of self. But it also is true in our marriage. It's like, so we need these, all those loves to really have a marriage that's fully alive. And we have many titles in our life, CEO or solicitor or president of the Catholic Truth Society. but mom and dad are far more important title. But even before that identity is our identity as a husband and wife. And before that identity is a son and daughter of God. And we have to go, the more important that identity is, allows us to do the next level. Out of our ability as baptized Christians, right? We know that we are sons and daughters of God, which then allows us to bring our best self to our marriage. But that marriage needs to be fully alive so we can let our kids bask in the glow of our couple love. This is the way God designed it, that they should know this is what love looks like from the very, or not just by what we say, but how we act, how we treat each other. I was surprised, I heard from a psychologist recently that our kids learn how to relate more, not how we relate to them, but how we as couple relate to each other. They
observe parents all the time. They're always watching us.
So there's something very, very important and valuable, both on a very natural, but also on a supernatural level. The grace to be a parent comes from the sacrament of matrimony. Out of that, you are able to. So keep that marriage alive with the grace and the love that you bring to it.
I actually, at one of our events, I just remembered this. I had a couple come over to me and ask me, and I didn't know where they stood, each one of them on this, but the wife asked me, is it okay for us to hug and kiss each other in front of our children? Is that inappropriate? You know, like they had young children and they were just kind of figuring it out. And she said, I don't know what's appropriate or not. And I just said, when your daughter gets married someday, what kind of marriage do you want? Do you want her to have a marriage to someone who just adores her and loves to look at her and hold, cup her hand? Is that what you want for her? And they were like, yes. I said, well, then you need to demonstrate that for her in your home. Obviously with, don't go overboard. Within reason. But for her to see that, then she'll want that. And she'll say, oh, that's what marriage is supposed to look like. So it's good for us, but it's so good for our children.
So the natural consequence of that is children, presumably.
Yeah, so that's right. 9 months later, you have to give it a name.
So I don't know how it happens, but it keeps happening. So after many years of kind of concern about overpopulation and all of a sudden the discourse in the air, I suppose probably Elon Musk's fault, is that there's too few. And I mean, particularly, the UK was always in a slightly better position than the rest of Europe, but we're kind of seem to be following suit. Unfortunately, the big Catholic countries seem to be kind of worst of all, especially in Europe. Italy, Spain, Ireland have the lowest kind of birth rates. Some really tragic numbers from, say, South Korea and stuff. And I know the States are going kind of in the same direction. Absolutely. You decided to have many children. Why?
What a great question.
So I'm not sure we decided.
I was going to say, that's what I was going to say.
Well, presumably, was that the plan?
Plan? What plan? So she came from a family of 10. Yeah. I came from a family of 6, which is the largest family I knew growing up. And so I thought, we'll have 16 kids. Add them two together. But we
didn't quite hit the mark,
we did say we wanted a large family, but we never had a number, right? Yeah. And I mean that in a genuine way. Like, we were open. And having children has been a great blessing. But there have been many moments when Alicia, we found out we were pregnant and we cried. Having children is a blessing all the time, but that doesn't mean it doesn't hurt sometimes, struggle sometimes.
Always feel like a blessing.
Yes, and there are some children that I realize there's no return policy. No, but so we
they know who they are.
I know. I do. We love you anyway. But there has been no greater blessing in our lives than having children.
Absolutely.
But it is a perilous thing to put your life in the hands of God.
And people do
in a good and wonderful way.
People, of course, ask us, very often the question is said to us, how do you discern if you should have another child? And I always would say, that's the wrong question. As a Catholic couple, you never discern if you should have another child. You discern if you should postpone pregnancy. The default.
For now.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. For now. Exactly. Because the default is we are open to life. We are always open to life. And that the default is that we will have another child unless we are discerning that, this is a time of abstinence because of mom's health, unemployment, whatever. But the thing is that you're always coming from that place of, we will have another child unless we have discerned with the Lord, forming our conscience, that there is grave reason to postpone pregnancy at this time. And there have been times where we actually were open to having another child and we didn't get pregnant, so that's something also that there are people who want more children, who God doesn't bless them, who knows why God's given them that cross. But when we say children are a blessing, it really is, again, something that we were open to, and God blessed us with those children. How we say that this is God's formation plan for us is children, which is why he gave us so many, because it was like, they need more formation. Give them another kid,
They need to learn patience more.
Exactly. But really, my children have made me the woman that I am today. because that was God's plan for my life. And it really does make me sad when I see beautiful, wonderful families and they'll say, oh yeah, we have two, we're done. And it's just, and it's just like a sadness in my heart, because I also think, do they say that in front of their kids? You know, when their children hear, oh yeah, we can only handle two. Like, how would that make you feel? You know, like I remember even as a child hearing my father talk about, you know, our family and always feeling really proud to be part of my family, because it was very clear my father was very proud of us. He was very proud. He was just like, oh yeah, we're open, as many kids as God wants us to have. Like he would always say things like that, as a contrast to people who say, oh no, this is it, we're done. It's like, you know, there is a sadness there. And I do think actually part of purgatory will be people see, God will show them, this is the plan I had for you that you said no to. And I think that's a real heartache. And so again, kind of going back to that message of hope for families, to recognize that when we act as we're created to be, we can be a real witness to people who don't know any better, because there's so much, as you know, so many people who were never told you should be open to having more children as a Catholic family. They don't know.
We were talking, my wife and I, to a group of people who are getting ready to enter the church at Easter. Lovely group full of fantastic questions. And we told them about, being open to life, and we spoke about our own experience. We have 7 children. And you could see that they took this very seriously, and then came with some really interesting. I mean, we're in the middle of a cost of living crisis, and the 2 couples who were kind of closest to marriage, their question was, one was literally, how much do I have to earn for each child? Okay, and the second one was, how can you manage, with all these children in the society in which we're in London. Property prices are sky high. Nothing seems to be set up for kind of large families. So, I mean, can you speak a bit to that? Because I mean, is it just having lots of kids just a hobby for rich people?
Yeah, I know.
Well, if you go to our website, you can download a spreadsheet and you can put in the number of children and how much money. Right. I don't have that spreadsheet.
I actually created a spreadsheet at one point and looked at, because we have to pay for Catholic school tuition and college, and that me too. Yes. Yeah. And then I deleted that spreadsheet and I destroyed the computer it was on, right? And so there are practical things with kids, but I just want to challenge us. I want to prick our conscience. Are you saying money is more important than babies or life or human existence, right? Or the flourishing of a family? Or are you saying you don't have enough love to give? Because I can guarantee, because when you say there's a financial aspect, of course there is. We needed a bigger car, we needed to move to a bigger place. There are restrictions that the world we're in have on us that cause some pain and suffering. Usually minor compared to all of human history, right? We often set ourselves up for a problem when we compare all the keeping up with the Joneses. I don't know what your idiom over here would be, right? And when we look at that and say, well, these are the kind of cars, this is the kind of house, this is the kind of neighborhood, this is if we set all that up, we have set ourselves up for a failure. That means that, well, based on this calculation, I can only have this. We need to change the math. We really do. We need to look and say, we want to be open, and we believe that each child will come with a blessing. And every child that we have received blessing. Oftentimes in a promotion at work or some other, that helped things that I couldn't see happen. There is a crazy thing when you trust in God. Doesn't mean that life is going to be perfect and it's going to be a bed of roses, but that you get the grace, the strength to do it. And I couldn't have imagined it. I trust God so much more because we've been open. And He stepped in. And He has challenged us to grow. I'm not that great, but look how awful I was before I had all these kids. These kids have helped me become a more generous, loving person. And so, but on a practical level, as particularly as a dad, I feel like that's my job to provide for the family, right? Many feel compelled for both mom and dad to work out of the home. And that's a hardship that I believe we as a society need to take some ownership for and say, we should create a world where we have the freedom to be at least one parent home with the kids to care for them. But that's, sometimes that's not possible.
Yeah.
But there are ways that we can make decisions and say, okay, well, we can stop doing this, this, and this so that we can invest our time and money in.
You know what I think about is that if anybody's seen the movie Schindler's List, and at the very end of the movie it's the most powerful scene when he's there, he's crying, right? And he's like, if I could have sold this car to get another person, I could have done this to have another person. And he was kind of coming to that realization of like, you can't put a price tag on a human person. And that was obviously that was that specific situation, but the principle still stays true. And all I know is that looking all throughout human history, throughout plagues and wars and Viking raiders and everything, people have always had children. Why it's even a question today is because of artificial contraception. We have to realize that. The only reason we are asking that question is because we have the option of artificial contraception. And I feel like for all of human history, people had children in very difficult situations and they made it work. The only reason we are now have that choice to make, and we have to recognize that we are having a conversation that has never been had in all of human history. There's something wrong with that, even on an anthropological level. And so we have to recognize, well, what were we made to be? Were we made to be even asking that question? And I look out, even traveling here throughout the UK and London and, every other places in New York and Edinburgh and Glasgow up in Scotland, but seeing couples who have 7, 6, 8 children. And they seem very normal and very happy. Somehow they figured it out. And so I just would like to help those couples to see and encourage them that I don't know, there is no spreadsheet that you can get. But all I know is that if you are faithful to what God has asked you to do and believe and trust in the wisdom of the church, she's our mother. Trust her. Go inform your conscience. Read the documents, get a good spiritual director. But that if the two of you go before the Lord and say, Lord, we don't know how we're going to do this. He's faithful. He's going to be faithful. I know that the Lord will be faithful and will answer your plea and will give you the peace that you're looking for. But we have to form our consciences, and avail ourselves of the wisdom of the church and then trust in the Lord.
Yeah. One just final thought on this. It's in couples, particularly young couples, saying we're open to life is a decision to say, I have hope.
That's right.
It is a decision that you make and say, I'm entering, because that's what the church asks, are you open to receiving children lovingly from God?
Yeah.
And when you say yes on the altar and then yes again in your marriage on a regular basis, you're saying yes to His plan for your family. That doesn't mean you obviously natural family planning, all of that mixed in, but you're saying, I believe that God has a plan for our world.
That's right.
And that it is the building block of all society, we just talked about earlier, but I'm open to being changed. I'm open to God using children and family and marriage to change me into a saint.
Right.
It isn't always easy,
right.
But it is the greatest path. We often say that we as lay don't have a seminary, but God sends us kids, and those kids help form us because they call out of us what we need. And I think too many people are delaying children, they're delaying marriage, they're delaying children, and really what they're delaying is growth and maturity.
That's
and
right.
Because God uses this, it's naturally designed for our growth and our good, that we might thrive as individuals.
Let's talk about natural family planning.
All right, let's get into it. None of us have any street cred. You realize that, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Just think of how many children we could have had if we didn't do NFP. We could have had 23 children.
So why is it different to? Why is it different to contraception? Is it just that it doesn't work very well? That's why some people say, calling it Vatican roulette and things like that. Say something about maybe what your kind of experience has been about why it's been a good news for your and why it's so different. I think some people really kind of understand it as either a kind of concession to the world, or go on. Sorry.
So, when I think about how God has created us, God could have made fertility unknowable. He could have created women to just...
Women are a mystery in many ways.
Exactly. He could have made it about 100% mystery, right? But he didn't. He didn't. He gave women a cycle that is discernible. And scientific research and what we know now is amazing. It's amazing, and it's accurate, and it's knowable. And I feel like what God has done by making our cycle knowable, he has called man and woman into this process of creation, to be a partner with them. God didn't have to do this, and he did. So how I see NFP, it's us participating with our Lord, with our Creator, in the act of creation. And I remember my mom, I had these conversations with my mother about NFP and people saying it's Catholic contraception. And my mom would say, the church doesn't say, if you are fertile, you must have sex. If you are fertile, you must do that. That's because really that's what people are, that's the logical end of the argument. No, of course the church isn't saying that. What the church is saying is you always need to be open to life. And if you have grave reason, you can choose to abstain for a time to avoid what you believe is God's will for you. After we had our 10th child, I was 40 years old when we had our youngest, Claire. And we decided at that point that we were going to abstain from then on to avoid getting pregnant again because of the risk of miscarriages. Yeah, because of miscarriage. And we really felt that's what God's will for us was at that time. And I remember thinking that if I would have gotten pregnant, I actually would have been fine being pregnant, but the hardest part about conceiving would have been, I would have felt like, oh Lord, I thought I knew what you wanted. I thought that we had discerned that you didn't want us to have a child right now, but okay, I guess I was wrong, and like to admit that. But my point is that really to be one with the Lord, recognizing that he has made that covenant with you. So anyway, so that's kind of like I see NFP as a way of us coming into a deeper relationship with the Lord. And when we were younger, those times of abstinence, of course,
were
difficult, absolutely. And it gets easier as you get older. And I think one of the reasons is because our trust in each other has grown, our love for each other has grown. And I think that, again, God uses that, and it has made our relationship and our lovemaking actually very exciting to have periods when we can't come together. Like Mike, when he was traveling for much of our marriage, for years and years, he had to travel a couple days a week. And there was something about, of course it was difficult, but it also was exciting then when he would come home. And I feel like NFP is like that. It can have a beautiful rhythm to your relationship that actually can help you grow in love and appreciation for each other.
You articulated it all really well. And the only thing I'll add is just kind of going back to the beginning. In a way, for us, NFP was a little bit of pulling back the veil of the mystery. Me understanding you and how it all works, but also God's design in that. And then it also was a regular discernment. Like it taught us how, on a monthly basis, what discernment really looks like.
Right.
Rather than contraception, which kind of dumps the decision on one person.
And it creates a use and it creates a deep sense that this is only ordered towards my selfish desire, right? Where the gift of self in NFP allow those times, particularly of abstinence, where it's like, no, this is a self-sacrifice. This is, in the grand scheme of things, it may not be, like we're martyrs. But those little moments build up.
That we are deciding as well.
It's deeper unity, but it's also that sacrifice of the love that we have. And then it also, if you go back to the other four loves, right, it requires those time where filial love and even storge, right, has to keep returning, and that agape love, like an unconditional love. And that's what we have seen in this. So you have the two extremes of the contraceptive, that is seeking to control, which probably doesn't, and then the others that might see even NFP as a Catholic contraceptive, and that's a fallacy as well, because both of them are recognizing that in natural family planning, we're always giving God the permission to do as He wishes.
Right.
There's a great quote from Chesterton about, what was it, birth control. There's no birth unless control.
Yeah, that's right.
So just thank you for dealing with that. Let's move on to the children. So it's often said that children don't come with a manual or a book of instructions. But you're providing something kind of close to that, okay? Or you're through your own kind of ministry, and I get the feeling that this is a kind of relatively recent phenomenon.
Yes.
Parenting books and all that kind of stuff. I got to say, I tried to avoid them as much as possible.
Good for you.
Probably know that, but why do you think this is kind of happening now? Is there something that's kind of happened in? I mean, I've got my own thoughts about this, but yeah.
So I don't believe our podcast, our ministry would be needed 50, 60 years ago.
Right.
I believe this all broke down when families started, and maybe it was longer than that, but when families broke down, when there was a disconnection between extended families, when we lost the sense of place that we were in a community. We weren't meant to be a nuclear family on our own. That wasn't God's original plan, that it was just this little family all on its own. We meant to have grandparents and uncles and aunts and uncles, cousins, and everyone around us.
We were meant to live in tribes.
Yeah, it was this deep, which, again, you have vestiges of this still present out there, but as a general rule, people feel more isolated than ever before. And in place of that, you have the Dr. Spock and you have the books and the parenting experts who, one, will tell you that if you don't follow this specific formula, you will irreparably, psychologically damage your child for the rest of their life. And then you have another book that says the exact opposite, but saying if you don't do this, you'll die. There's this tyranny of experts that has cropped up. And it adds a weight to parents in a real way. But really, we were meant to do this in that tribe, in that larger sense of community.
If you think about it, in days gone by, in a person's growing up years, right, from the time that they were born to when they were ready to get married, they were around not only their own family, but they would be around maybe their cousins who were maybe a little bit older, or a little bit younger. They could, of course, see their grandparents. They could, of course, see aunts and uncles and single people, and they could have the time to observe many different, on an intimate way, many different marriages, many different types of family, different size families. They would just be around more people, have contact with more people. When my mother got married, and they got married in like the 60s, right? Which wasn't like 20 years ago, it was a little while ago. But still, she had never babysat. She was never around lots of children. I think my father said he had never really, or you had said even when he had never changed a diaper or been around a lot of little kids.
I was hoping I'd never have to.
I've come across a lot of people who've kind of reached marriage, for example, without ever really holding a baby, for example. And you can sort of tell at the beginning they're kind of holding it like like a bomb.
But for us as human beings to realize, again, that is unnatural. So that's where the parenting experts come in. Because before, you could kind of develop your own way of doing that. Oh, I saw, just even subconsciously. Because subconsciously.
I like that. I don't like the way that they're doing that.
Exactly. And you were able to observe that and see that. And even kind of try it out on your own when you're babysitting and, different things like that. But anyway, or caring for people in your community. But now that we don't have that, that's where we're just going to put experts in quotes here now, come in of people saying, oh, well, this is the way you should do it. Oh, these are the needs of the human person. And don't get me wrong, there are definitely some important principles, absolutely, that things, for example, principles like mom and dad have different roles. That is a immutable principle. That does not mean...
Shocking statement.
I know, it's very shocking.
With that. You get demonetized or whatever it is.
But that doesn't mean that only mom changes the diapers. No, it's much deeper than that. Yeah, right. There's different roles in the life of the children that mom and dad. So those kinds of principles are still true, and experts are very helpful to kind of identify those, and also the basic needs of children. But where I think that we get into problems is when people are there are prescriptions given of these are the words that you need to say, or these are the things that you need to do.
Or this is a checklist. If you want to raise the perfect child, check.
Exactly. And because I do
not
have
DNA
so much
designed bababies or things like that.
Yeah.
Or,
I do have a great love for the young parents today because they want to do it right. They want, and there's nothing wrong with that. That is a God-given desire, or that desire to not mess it up. I'm like, I love that. I love that so much. But what they have to have in that is a confidence in each other, a confidence that you can figure this out, a confidence in not in experts or in a method, but a confidence in the fact that the grace of God for marriage is present for parenting.
And you can find the right answer.
And you can figure it out. And to look at other couples that you admire, look at other people that you like. And in our podcast, what we try to do is kind of bring up topics. And one of the greatest compliments I feel like a dad gave us once, he said, when I listen to your podcast, you always give me the freedom to disagree with you. You always give me that freedom because we put ideas out there and say, here, these are things you should be talking about and thinking about. But it may,
which is what you don't get in these parenting manuals. It's like this, right? Yes. I mean, we're drawing to the end of our time. Unfortunately, I'm enjoying this discussion hugely. So maybe, I mean, you speak a lot about kind of the last part is the kind of the spirituality of the couple, and I wonder whether we can maybe approach two things in this question that I'm going to ask, because so many Catholics, of the previous generation, of our generation as well, have seen their children kind of abandon the faith, and many of my friends, and I remember, it was a constant preoccupation as we were having our children as well, was the fear that the same would happen to our own children. So kind of what words of encouragement or strategies perhaps can you offer? I presume that will come into the question of kind of the spirituality of the couple as well.
Yeah.
So a quick first answer, and then you can give some good thoughts to it. But first response is, if we want children like no one else, then we need to live like no one else, right? If you want to keep your kids Catholic, I believe we need to change the question. We don't want to just keep our kids Catholic. We want our kids to be saints. We want our kids to be missionary disciples in this world, right? Mm-hmm. We need to say, is our faith, our individual and corporate faith, substantial enough to not just pass to our kids, but through our kids, through to our grandchildren and through the generations? Because I believe that God set the family up as this multi-generational legacy that we are supposed to leave.
You're not just parenting your children, you're parenting your grandchildren.
I mean, if I may just interject, there's an example which I've always found quite helpful from the business world, and they say that companies either grow or they contract. They never stay the same. Right. And so a bit like what you're saying, it's like our children, if we want to be radical in our Christianity, we want our children to be even more radical. We want them to make us look like, lily-livered liberals.
And that's what we want. That's exactly. Because we want them to stand on our shoulders and reach for heaven, right? We want to set them up for that. And it requires us to have a real mindset shift, because in days gone by, it may have been sufficient to say, we're going to church on Sunday, and we prayed a little bit as a family.
And we'll send our kids to Catholic school.
And we had the Catholic schools, and we even had somewhat of society kind of orienting towards this. The secular culture is not just not on our side, they're antithetical to all that we believe, and they're trying to separate mom and dad. They're trying to separate parents from children, and we need to be radical in the way that we did it. And this isn't again, this isn't for the light of heart. This isn't overly complicated, but it's not easy, in the sense that it's going to be challenging. But to really pass on the faith, you need to first receive it yourself. It's kind of like whenever you're teaching somebody, like when you're doing marriage courses or baptismal, you have to know it more than your student. Well, our children are our students. They are our disciples that are under our care, if you will. We need to have a faith that we have received so that we can give them, because if we can't just give the little bit we have to make it fully alive. And our kids need to see what it means to be a Catholic in the world on our faces. This is not any way you can't fake it being Catholic.
Kids are great BS detectors.
Yeah,
the teenagers will not tolerate any lack of authenticity.
Right. So you need to own it, and you need to have that as part of your family life. Right?
Yeah, and I think that you cannot underestimate, and we kind of have said this before about marriage, the power of your marriage in the faith life of your children. Because if you are preaching to them, you should go to church, you should go to confession, all of that, and then you're treating your spouse with contempt, you don't have a strong marriage, that affects your children more than you know. Yeah. Because they will look at you and they'll say, you don't really believe any of that you're telling me. You don't have that integrity. Because we as a couple project and teach our children about the love of God. Neither one of us can love our children the way God loves. We can only do it together as man and woman, as husband and wife. That's how we reflect the love of God for our children. And so that's extremely important. That being said, I do have to say this. We can never forget the role of free will. And that, I know that you could be the perfect parent and still have a child choose to walk away. And I know this because I look at Adam and Eve in the garden, right? They knew God and they still chose to distrust him. Judas was with Jesus, was with him for 3 years, saw the miracles, was loved by him, known by him, and he still betrayed him. He still thought that he knew better than our Lord.
Let alone us, who are imperfect.
Exactly. So there is always the role of free will, obviously, and especially to those parents whose children are adults who have wandered away from the faith. I just want to encourage them to always leave the door open. Always just love them. Just love. They know what you believe. They know what you think. You need to pray other people come into their lives to reach out to them. But what's the most important thing is that you show them your love is not conditional upon their behavior. I had a father say that. He was telling me about a situation with his daughter who he raised Catholic, invested deeply in, who decided to shack up with her boyfriend. And he told her, you know what I think, and I want you to know my love for you is not conditional upon what you do. I love you no matter what, and I will always love you. And he had to say that with tears in his eyes. But I think that when our children feel like, oh, they failed us, that's not a helpful means of conversion. Really what they need for conversion is they need to know the truth, but more importantly, they need to know that you love them, and then you just pray that the Lord makes his will known to them.
And the best defense to keep our kids Catholic is a good offense, right? And so that for those who maybe their kids are gone, that's the story, right? But the best, what they say that the best day to plant a tree was 20 years ago, right? And the second best day is today, And even no matter where your kids are at, you can make a change, and it begins with you. If you still have children who are young, you need to create an atmosphere in the home, and we do a lot in our podcast talking about the culture that you create in your home that orients them towards the good, the true, the beautiful.
We talk about this a lot.
And it's more caught than taught, which is what we've really talked about, right? That they pick up on it as well as what you see or what you say, as well as what you bring them into a real experience of faith. And never to, I'll leave one idea. I think our job as parents, when we're trying to keep our kids Catholic, is to pair earthly goods with spiritual goods. Meaning, we're going to a special holy hour, or we're going to Mass. We'll tie it with some celebration. Catholics, our culture has always had parties and celebrations, right? We need to bring that back so our kids understand there is joy in being Catholic. That it's not bribery, getting donuts after Mass or getting sweets or something. It's about inviting them in to say, okay, this is a spiritual good that I'm tying and connecting in the minds of my children. This
Christ with a marriage and really good wine.
There you go. That's exactly it.
Okay, last question. Okay, so you talk about family spirituality a lot. I often kind of envy the life of a monk, which is very precisely arranged to optimize, regular prayer, order, contemplation, and family life is what? Not
so much.
Okay, yeah. So yeah, what do you say? What do you say to that?
So I think that we need to follow the example of very good priests and be pastorally sensitive to our flock, right? Because we as parents are the priests of the home. So when we pray with our children, we need to be very aware of where they are at and what, kind of like something that is what is age appropriate. And we do have podcasts specifically on praying with children. And I think that we as Catholics, again, we need to take advantage of all of the stuff, right? That we have beautiful pictures, candles, incense, bells, and all of these different things, rosary beads. Like, there's so much that we can give our children that experience of the faith. And one of the things, too, that I feel like parents do oftentimes is they're so focused on getting their kids to do what is right, they're not praying themselves. What our children need, they need to see us praying. So when you're at Mass, don't be like, when I see parents, they're looking at their kids all during Mass. It's like, well, of course your child has nothing to model. During Mass, I would do everything I can to be focused on what is happening. And then if I have to talk to my children, I try to say as little as possible and just always be pointing them back to that prayer. But within the home, and maybe it's better to, instead of saying an entire rosary where you're fighting with everyone half the time, maybe it's better to say a decade of the rosary and say, well, then we're going to make brownies, or something like that. But I think it's good for parents to remember, children will not always remember what you say. They will remember how they felt. And if the experience of prayer for them, they always felt they were wrong, they were condemned, they were in trouble, maybe you and your spouse need to sit down and say, how can we do this differently? Because children have a relationship with God. By virtue of their baptism, they have a relationship with God. The problem in nurturing that relationship is not the child. The problem is us. We are the problem.
You kind of have to get out of the way.
Exactly. Very often we are the ones that have to get out of the way. And we have to learn, how can we do that? What is appropriate time? What is appropriate to add? And that's an art. It's not a science. Like I said before, it's no spreadsheet, right? But I think that we can create an environment where a child can be free to respond to God. And very many times, those are in unexpected ways and not necessarily in verbal prayers, but in the environment of prayer that we create, which includes all the things they can see and taste and touch, but also includes us, right? Are we praying? Are we having our minds turned towards God, being a model for them?
One last thought just for you on the whole monastic life, right? Sometimes it might seem like we would escape to that. I suspect, I don't know this to be true, but I suspect in some ways the monastery is basing its life on the life of the family, in the sense that we have hours that we get up for in the middle of the night with a crying child or a teenager who's coming home, or we have different things. And I've had a priest share with me, the sacrifices that we choose are much easier than the ones that we don't. In family life, we have so many sacrifices that just come, that are naturally designed, right, for our good, but we don't always choose them. We kind of choose them, but then it's this beautiful plan of formation that God has designed for us.
Family life, lean into that and
family life
form us.
is naturally designed for our sanctity. It's naturally designed for the self-sacrifice, for growth and maturity, for the depth of faith that allows us to grow into who we were meant to be, who God has meant us to be.
That's a great place to stop. So thank you so much for sharing your wisdom, your experience with us. Where can people follow the work that you do?
Yeah, so messyfamilyproject.org will have all our podcasts, and anywhere you find podcasts, you can find us. But on our website, there's free downloadable resources on a discipline guide or a technology guide, right, as well as information about our courses and marriage getaways.
Oh yeah, we'll have to talk about kids and mobile phones at some point as well. That'd be great. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks so much.